Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome all of you on behalf of the European Council on Foreign Relations to this year's Japan-Europe Forum. My name is Janke Oertler. I'm the director of the Asia program, and I'm incredibly grateful to the many experts who have come to share their knowledge during this forum. I'm glad you all made it. Very few of you here into our studio, and many of you outside on the screen. It was 2 years ago when we had the Japan-Europe Forum in February 2020, where this was the last in-person event we did before COVID hit Europe with full force. And if you had asked me at the time whether in 2022 we would still host a mostly virtual format, whether we would still walk into the room with masks, I would have probably declared everyone insane. But this is exactly the situation that we have. And we're trying to make the very best of the situation to foster exchange and dialogue despite the conditions and despite the fact that it's not easy to actually see each other in person. We have here today our German and French guests in the studio, and we have a fantastic guest in Tokyo on the screen. This is all due to the pandemic, of course. We could not make it possible for our Japanese guests to travel. But as I said, we're trying to make the best of the way this is. Then the time could not be more crucial. War is looming at Europe's eastern borders. The security situation in East Asia is incredibly tense. US-China confrontation is growing in intensity by the day. For Europe and Japan, this is a time to kind of reposition themselves in a changing global order. There is a shared interest of both sides in keeping up a system of international rules that govern trade and politics, security, and even climate policies. But we realistically have to admit that the rules-based order is becoming sort of a hard sell these days. After the federal election in Germany in September 2021 and Japan's lower house elections in November 2021, the new administrations will be faced with high expectations regarding the nature of their foreign policies, alliance building, and their takes on their Indo-Pacific policies. In Germany, Chancellor Scholz has to lead Germany on a new path after 16 years of Angela Merkel's leadership. In Japan, Prime Minister Kishida has an electoral success under his wings, but both have to deal with a general public that is more averse to change than a rapidly changing international environment may allow them. With the Indo-Pacific agenda, Europe and Japan have found sort of a common narrative that can help with some of these readjustments. So how will the new administrations move the EU's and Japan's Indo-Pacific strategy and their China policy forward? What will this mean for the US and other players in the region? I am incredibly delighted to discuss this morning with this fantastic panel. With us today we have Didi Kirsten Tatlow, Senior Fellow in the Asia Program at the German Council on Foreign Relations, based here in Berlin. She's a former New York Times journalist, a Hong Konger, not only by birth but also at heart, I would say. She published a highly informative and well-received book entitled China's Quest for Foreign Technology Beyond Espionage last year, and just last night has brought out a paper on Japan's economic security, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. On the screen, we have Ken Jimbo, professor at the Faculty of Policy Management at Keio University in Japan. He's one of Japan's key observers of the foreign policy and defense policy, as well as multilateral security in Asia-Pacific and regionalism in East Asia. Kenjimo, it's fantastic to have you here and fantastic to have you on the screen with us today. To my left is my fantastic colleague, Frederick Grahr, Senior Fellow in the Asia Program at ECFR, Europe's, I could say, leading voice on the Indo-Pacific strategy, based in Paris, who worked before for the French Foreign Ministry and Defense Ministry, and also just published a pretty fantastic new book with Jean-Luc Saman entitled The Indian Ocean as a New Political and Security Region. So this is my bookshelf section here at the beginning. And then last but certainly not least, I'm very grateful that Frank Müller-Rosentritt is joining us today, member of the Parliament, the German Bundestag, member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, part of the foreign policy team who negotiated the new coalition treaty. So he will be knowledgeable in telling us what exactly the new German government is about, but he's also one of the key voices in Germany and Japan relations. So very grateful that you took the time out of what is at the moment an incredibly busy schedule for all the politicians around Berlin. So thank you for being with us. So with this, I would like to start out with you, Didi, and just say, where are we at the moment when it comes to the kind of broader framing, where we find ourselves, where do Europe and Japan situate themselves in this? Maybe you can give us a little bit of a start here.
Right, so thank you so much, Janka. It's really nice to be here. And I will just get right to it. There's a lot to talk about. I think that what we're looking at here, of course, is Europe and Japan, but I want to open it up a little further to look at these twin poles, if you like, that are certainly emerging, have long emerged in the world, of naturally the US and China. And right at this moment, we have Chancellor Scholz in the US. He's just had a meeting with Biden yesterday, I think it was. And of course, on the other side of the world, on Friday, we had a meeting between Xi Jinping, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, and Vladimir Putin. And I think that this frames nicely, if slightly disturbingly, the current situation that we are in, these very powerful poles, which are increasingly in disagreement at loggerheads. And what I really wanted to focus on, however, was initially to look at what happened in Beijing on Friday, February the 4th, which, by the way, was my birthday. Not that that's either here nor there, but it made for a rather busy birthday. Because I really did feel that the opening of these Winter Olympics in Beijing was, and the meeting that took place between Xi and Putin was of enormous significance. I think it will go down in history as something of a moment where things clarified, where they crystallized. I read the Kremlin announcement, the statement of the meeting. I read the version in Chinese, and I have to say, I was pretty almost speechless, because I got this sense from it of the sheer ambition rising between China and Russia, however complex that relationship is, and the very clear appeal for what they call, a new international era, Putin joining Xi Jinping on that now, which we should understand as nothing less than a new world order. There was a very strong attempt to relativize the concept of human rights as we've known it since the late 1940s, as it was developed at the United Nations, with Chinese input, of course, by the way. Chinese thinkers, philosophers were part of the creation of that concept of human rights, which has driven and shaped so much of the world that we're in, for not always very well, has to be said. But a very decided attempt to relativize that and to take that, concept and change it and say, just because you decided it doesn't mean that we like it or that we agree with it or that we're going to go forward with it. And to me, this really was, one understands the symbolism in Chinese politics, how the theater of the Communist Party is so enormously important in communicating messages. To me, this meeting really was absolutely very crucial, and the statement very, very important too. So where does that leave us? Well, I suppose symbolically, there we are, having to deal with this new rising world order, and needing to find our friends within it, and needing to be really good friends with our friends. And this again, of course, brings us to Japan and Europe. And I might just perhaps leave some colleagues to say more about that.
Fantastic, Didi. Maybe we'll just head over to Tokyo for this. You've been watching probably what's been going on as well, Jimbo, from Japan, looking at the meetings that have taken place, looking at exactly this. So when you relate to that, how does that resonate in Tokyo? Is there also a feel for there's just really seminal, there's a change in the global order, and Europe and Japan have to find sort of a new spot within it?
Yeah, thank you very much for Didi's framing, and I also concur that there has been the emerging poles that the international order has to deal with it, especially in the Japan-Europe context. When you look back like 7-8 years ago, we do have a China problem as it is, and we are very conscious about the structural challenges that we need to face with China, not only in a bilateral context, but with regard to United States presence in the Western Pacific, where we see the rising anti-Axis environment, which makes highly costly for the U.S. To engage militarily into the theater, including Taiwan, Korean Peninsula, South China Sea, and else. But during that time, that when you look at the European behavior towards the Chinese markets, especially on the investment and trade, I think there has been a much more, momentum of the growth and also the positivisms about what China brings to the economy of Europe, including lots of automobile industries and tech transfers, negotiation for the investment treaty, and those have been regarded as a net positive in terms of the Europe-China relationship for some years. But when it comes to Japan-Russia relationship, I think Europe has a significant different view, even after the Crimea. That the Japan have taken some I think, a unique kind of positioning towards how we deal with Russia, with the expectation that the Japan-Russia bilateral relationship can have I think, distinctive kind of development potentials with the particular subjects that that Japan has in our mind. But in the case of Europe-Russia relationship, there has been, I think, that incrementally very difficult kind of strategic relationship has become the reality, where we see as some kind of the cross-referencing of the issue. Japan has the issue with China, Europe has the issue of Russia, but in terms of the cross-relationship, we have nuances of bilateral engagement in both countries. But now, as Didi has pointed out, that I think there has been a more, convergence between how China and Russia are realigned with each other. And in case of how Russia tried to pressure towards Ukraine border, some says with the backup with the Chinese economic and also strategic kind of assistance through Russia, that Russia's behavior can be, can be observed as a force multiplier. So that is how much that bilateral realignment has become a much more structural challenge to all of us. That's good news for us, is that the Japan and Europe can share the strategic platform with each other. But at the same time, that the consistent kind of exploitation, that how we can really divide the interests between China and Russia has become much more difficult task for both Tokyo and also for Europe. Those are my snapshot observation at this time.
Thank you, and we will get back to that at the next cut, I would say, because there's lots to pick up on. But what I would like to do is bring my colleague Frederick Graer in here, because he's been working on the Indo-Pacific agenda, and the Indo-Pacific agenda has been precisely kind of designed to be an answer to the changing world order, to be an offer to the region that allows us that. So where do you see us at the moment? Where is the Indo-Pacific, the European Indo-Pacific agenda at this very juncture? And is it progressing as planned, maybe as well?
It's progressing perhaps faster than planned, and yet the question is really whether it will be able to catch up with the sequence of events that they unfold. The strategy of the EU in the Indo-Pacific was always about China. This was about managing China in a way, but at the same time, I fully agree with Ken about the fact that it was a way to try to reconcile our economic interests on the one side with our security needs on the other one. From that perspective, it was not that different from anything else which has happened either in Japan or in Australia or anywhere else for that matter, be it in ASEAN, India, and so on. And it is quite clear that as the polarization grows, then it's becoming almost untenable. Yet, I think that the existence of a strategy itself is evidence of an evolution of the EU vis-à-vis China to start with. 2 years ago, that would have been simply unthinkable. And actually, it was a taboo in many member states. It was a taboo in the EES itself and so on. So we have gone a long way. Are we going fast enough? It's very tempting to say no, and yet at the same time, the strategy says a few things, because it does still insist on the need to promote a level playing field. This is, of course, an economic consideration which has deep political consequences and deep strategic consequences. It does insist on multilateralism. Again, multilateralism is not just a nice thing to say in diplomatic setting. This is about building a rapport de force thematically and occasionally. It does not necessarily imply an a priori hostility toward China, but it does say a few things vis-à-vis China, because this is exactly what China is opposed to, and that is exactly the basis of the system that China is trying to erode. So what can we expect? We can expect in the forthcoming months a lot of difficulties. Clearly, the Ukraine crisis will create a few questions in terms of resource allocation, in terms of burden sharing, in terms of attention diversion, and so on and so forth. So this will be a fact that will, but at the same time, this meeting between Xi Jinping and Putin does underline that we cannot really evacuate the Indo-Pacific dimension, that Japan will not do for obvious reasons, but Europe may be tempted to do, and so on and so forth. Plus, there is also a strong component of, how could I say, transactionalism within the EU strategy in the European side. At the ECFR, we conducted a survey of opinions and perception of the Indo-Pacific in Europe. Clearly, a lot of states are interested in the Indo-Pacific much less because of the Indo-Pacific per se than because of a willingness to maintain US protection in Europe. So this plays exactly into the situation we are in now, and it's going to be difficult to get out of it. Now, what can we expect is still difficult to know. What we will expect from not just Germany, but all European actors is that they don't get bogged down into the nitty-gritty of the strategy. You know, this is a very vast program, a very vast agenda, and it's easy to pick and choose and decide that we're going to be there or there because we have the capacity, there we don't have the capacity. The strategy per se makes sense, but as a whole, not just as separate pieces. And at the same time, we'll need to move on and not forget that this is first and primarily a strategy. So we have to keep that in mind and make sure that whatever we do it in a strategically meaningful way. That's one thing. To Japan, I will say, well, help you on that. And I will say help you by talking to us, but help us also give substance to whatever has been signed to start with. We have an EPA, but we also have a connectivity partnership, for example, which so far has not produced anything. Now is the time to precisely try to and accelerate the movement to start moving in the right direction together. And perhaps also clarify your position, because it's not always clear what you really expect from Europe, except saying what the Japanese government would be very cautious saying vis-à-vis China. You know, Europe is basically in the same position. It knows its interest. It's not really clear how far it's willing to go. And I guess the Japanese government is in the very same position. That's where we stand. But now is the time to move on, because, you know, this is no longer our decision to make. The decision has been made on the other side, and it's not favorable to us.
So from a political perspective, Frank Müller-Rosentritt, you have listened to the experts who can analyze the situation, but fortunately or unfortunately don't take decisions to change the situation. Facing the current context, what does that do to German foreign policy making? What do you see, what are the expectations? And where do you see Germany-Japan relations kind of fitting into that as well?
At first, let me say that I can underline every frame and every sentence said in this first minutes. So, and this is and if you ask for the steps, the next step in the government, I think our view of the world has changed. 2 years ago, I always focused that we have to change our focus. Now, I think with the new coalition agreement, we definitely changed our narrative in the world, how we want to see the world. Because the illusion that the history is always on side for our liberal free world, and on the end it will every time win, is a naive illusion, definitely. And so we cannot be longer more the hinge between East and West. I think we have to search for partners. They share the same values, and we have to come together, because you said it already. We come from a multipolar world before the First World War. Then we have a very strong bipolar world, then a multilateral world, and now we make several rollbacks to a multipolar world, and now it's something like a bipolar, and if you want that our values like freedom, democracy will win, and human rights, for example, then we have to change our political behavior, definitely. And it means that we have to make, we write it down in the coalition agreement. And you mentioned already, I was member of the team, that we have to make a diplomatic firework, and our democracy partners in Southeast Asia and also in Japan, we want to start government consultations between Germany and Japan. It's unbelievable that we didn't have this already. And you see also our travel policy from Angela Merkel, the former chancellor. You see he was, I think, 12 times in China and 3 times in India, for example. And how often in Japan? So, and this is amazing. We want to change this, and I think we have to focus very to our mind-like partners in Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, Taiwan, and that not against China, but that can China see that we are independent, and that's what we have to evaluate how independent we are. And we are independent, and then we have to reduce our and we have to focus on these countries.
Maybe I can follow up briefly on that, because I think in the coalition treaty that ambition is very clear. The kind of question of systemic rivalry runs like a little red thread through the entire document as well. It kind of reads in the outset of the treaty, or and you can see it in the preamble of the treaty. You can see it as a red thread running through the foreign policy chapter. I think that's been well noted around the world as well, that there may be some change coming from Berlin now.
Definitely.
How does the Ukraine crisis affect that Indo-Pacific approach? How does that draw back political attention? What is your sense from within the government, from within the Bundestag at the moment? Does Germany have the bandwidth to deal with the challenges simultaneously? Or do you think that will be a bit much for the German government at this early stage as well?
I think the Ukraine crisis isn't the game changer. I think the game changer is how illiberal China is or becomes in the last week. This is the game changer. If you see what happens in Hong Kong, if you see what happens with companies in Germany, if you see what happens with the tennis player, and this is the game changer that also the research community in Europe give us support. And so it's a learning system, and so we learn and we see it, and of course, if you see that you have 1,500 kilometers away from Berlin, you have a border with war. Nobody could imagine 6 or 7 years ago that it's possible. But we could also not imagine that Hong Kong goes away. And now we see what's happened in Taiwan with the Air Force from China. How often the Air Force from China flew over Taiwan? It's unacceptable. And so we have to make clear that the international law is for Germany and for our partners like Japan. This is the this is the ground floor for everything. So, and we cannot accept if Putin underlined the Budapest Memorandum 1994 and accept the borders of Ukraine, accept that you can choose their own whether they're on a NATO or not. So, and now it's not the world crashed the agreement. It's Putin, and like China has also crashed, and we have to say that we don't accept this, and we have to say stop. And yes, and we have to make much more with Ukraine. What Germany does right now with Ukraine, I'm a little bit ashamed for it, because that's definitely not enough. And how it is to the government in Ukraine, you see this morning.
Yeah, Didi, maybe we can just kind of take up on that and to say, with your framing of the kind of seminal change in the China-Russia relationship as well, then Ukraine is just a symptom of this changing world order in a way. That is something that we probably cannot see our China policy, our Russia policy as separate issues, or at least not entirely as different issues. How would you situate ourselves in that at the moment? Do we have what it takes to handle this? And particularly with regard to economic security, I think that's an important aspect here, because obviously from the military dimension, and Kenjima, I'll come back to you in just a minute on the military dimension as well, but from the economic dimension, particularly for Japan and Europe, what can we learn from Japan also maybe in the approach?
Yeah, so there are kind of two questions there, and I before I briefly sort of answer them, I'd like to just pick up on what Herr Müller-Rosentritt said about Putin changing the rules of the game with Ukraine, and how it was him who did it and not us. And I think we see exactly the same phenomena over Hong Kong, where the treaties one treaty lodged at the United Nations, the Joint Declaration on the Future of Hong Kong between Britain and China, and the Basic Law of Hong Kong, have both been broken by Beijing, which now says that the Joint Declaration is quote-unquote a historic document. So therefore international treaties apparently have an expiry date when it pleases Beijing. And the promises made in those treaties are being one by one taken away, reduced, destroyed, however you want to say it. The Xinhua News Agency just said that as of just a couple of days ago, 162 people in Hong Kong have been arrested under the new so-called national security law, which is of course a state security law because it seeks to protect the state, the Communist Party state, and not the nation or the people in the nation. I think that's very clear. So I just wanted to make that point that we do have this parallel here, right, which is, well, it's enormously symbolic, and it's also in terms of content really rather disturbing and not a coincidence, I think. And I think this is how we do have to see it now. So I think that with Ukraine, it's interesting that the Putin-Xi statement on Friday at the Winter Olympics, I realize I keep going back to the Winter Olympics, I really do see it as something of a bit of a turning point in some ways, at least in terms of how it expresses the problem for us. That Putin clearly supported Xi Jinping's ambitions to take Taiwan. That was spelled out, and on his side, Xi Jinping did not, the document that I read, the version I have so far read, did not name Ukraine by name, but said, followed this kind of logic of Putin completely and said that NATO may not expand, NATO is a relic of the Cold War, etc. So they're very clear support for the Kremlin's position on Ukraine. So there again, we have this kind of 1-2, it's like they're standing there holding hands. So exactly, what then are the possible responses to all of this? That's the thing we all want to know. And we did do a paper that's just out about the concept of economic security, which is being built in Japan. There is a economic security division in the National Security Council. There is a economic security committee, which is staffed by many people in Japan. Perhaps, Ken Jimbo would have much more to say about that. It's a very interesting situation. They're trying to build up through the economy, through technological protection, even through blocking land sales in sensitive areas around military installations on contested territories, this kind of thing. and also moving to do things, which is to me fascinating, because I have looked at this issue of technology transfer in a lot of detail, to guard patents, Japanese patents, which are considered to have dual function, military-civil fusion function, or in any way, shape, or form to be especially sensitive and important, to not publish them anymore. Because what's happening is that, the Communist Party's system of technology transfer scans the world for information, for technology, and patents is one enormous source of that information. So literally to not publish them anymore. And this is a fascinating and in some ways double-edged development, clearly. But as Xi Jinping said recently, science has no borders, but scientists have a motherland. He said that. So there we are. This is why we're being forced to react, and how do we do that? Economic security, I think it's something that I hope that Germany and Japan and the EU and Japan would talk about a lot more.
Thank you very much, Didi. I would like to throw that immediately over to Tokyo, this question. So as an observer of classic securities relations for a long time, how do you think the whole idea of economic security now fits into the broader strategic framework that the Japanese government wants to kind of reposition itself within? How does it relate to military strength? What kind of component is it? Maybe you can just help us understand a little bit better here as well.
Yeah, I think it's a dynamic processes, and it's very hard to generalize at this moment. But I think way back in 10 years ago, that Japan tried to promote its economic partnership strategy with the partner countries, and also after the Trump administration withdrawal from the TPP, Japan was one of the initiators to create the TPP with remaining 11 countries, which has become the determination for Japan to create the rule-based economic order in Indo Pacific, in line with what the WTO tried to maintain its free trade and investment order. But I think that the economic security comes from a slightly different angle, and especially with the heightened tension between United States and China over the economic domain. Trump administration's rapid kind of materialization of the foreign investment restriction to the U.S. Assets, and also to the trade wars by increasing the tariffs with each other, and also export control has also been associated, and then all the way to the tech transfer by application of the Department of Commerce, USTR, strong restriction of the titling of the lots of a Chinese company who has a lots of association with the military components, and those kind of restriction policies have now been internationalized to apply even to the foreign companies, non-US companies, by using the kind of indirect restriction order. And so that has been the strong requirement by the Japanese government and also the business community in line to adapt those new, I think, trade and investment environment. But here comes the question that the Japanese, firms are operating both in the Chinese market and also in the U.S. markets. So with global, economic and the business environment, Japanese firms now has to readjust itself to so-called internal decoupling business processes to operate on the one hand with Chinese value chain network, at the to the other, the US and G7 types of the business have to be completely separated from the R&D to the business promotions to personal management to all the accounting processes. You cannot really have the cross kind of domain synergy inside the company. I think that will risk your business, especially in the United States. So it has been the adaptation processes on the part of the businesses, how the economic security policy needs to be sorted out inside Japan. And currently, as Didi mentioned, that we are now in the process of the passing the bill on the economic security, which has a couple of pillars, as Didi has already mentioned. One is the investment restriction on the Japanese properties, including the real estates and else. And the second is the like a tax transfer restrictions, and by application of the more strict patent, as Didi correctly pointed out. To mentioning about I think a dual use technology needs to be finely refined and defined as the I think the materials to be potentially transferred to the Chinese military industry complexes. So those kind of awareness have now been announced much further to the business community inside Japan. And finally, I think personal management. I think that there are so many, international skilled laborers now in Japan, including the very highly talented Chinese scientists and the business workers are now working in Japan. We welcome it, and I think that's also very much important source of our, the industrial basis for the future. But at the same time, that I think the screening processes and also the security clearance issue have now been much more sensitive issue in Japan. So we cannot really, maintain the kind of open policy in the labor market and also in the investment policy as it is. What we have I think cultivated so far has been reviewed quite significantly with this law. Those are, I think, my observation at this time.
Follow up briefly on that. So from what you're saying, it sounds like Japan is really beefing up its defenses on the economic side, is really beefing up its capacities, and has a realization that a degree of decoupling is already a reality. It's not something that we want or don't want, a conversation that we often have here in Europe still, whether we want decoupling or whether it's a desirable, but you would say like it's already there. From your perspective, I think a forum like this is always good also to get the perspective of the other side on how we are being perceived. Do you think that Europe is still being naive when it comes to the China challenge? And would you say that the Indo-Pacific agenda that Frederick has kind of eloquently laid out, that is being perceived as serious in Japan? Or is there a degree of, well, you really haven't fully gotten the problem yet here, maybe you're too far away from it? What is your perspective from Tokyo?
Well, I think that's an excellent question. And I think it is still on the Japan side, which I think remains to be ambiguous about whether we have truly decided a strategic decision on China. Because first of all, I mentioned about the decoupling, but it's the internal decoupling inside the company. Whether Japanese economy can decouple from the value chain in Asia, that is highly dubious, because Japan has been part of this wide, supply value chains inside Asia that is inclusive of China. There's 14,000 Japanese company operating in the Chinese market, and most of them are making profits. And in terms of the investment return rate, globally speaking, that's I think 5 or 6% in the average, net average surplus in the Japanese investment behavior in the global market. But Chinese per se, I think Japan accounts for 16.9% plus for the investment return. That is enormous kind of benefits and potential still exist in the Chinese market. Japanese economy still lives in that context as well. So it is very hard to kind of make a kind of black and white types of division in terms of how the Japanese economy will deal with the Chinese markets at this time. But we have to be very conscious about the emerging kind of, the economic security concerns, and also that on the particular agenda, like investment, trade, tech transfer, we have to set higher standards of the rules that we operate those economies. That's number one. And second, basically, we do have very much like a welcome mode for European engagement in the Indo-Pacific. It is highly welcoming processes that UK, Dutch, Germany, Netherlands, all created together with the EU, created the Indo Pacific strategy, and there are more frequent, showing up of the UK and EU member states forces dispatched and deployed to the Western Pacific, and then to cultivate the interoperability and the joint activity together with militaries in the Indo-Pacific region, including that of the Japanese self-defense force. And as you might have suspected, that Japan has no illusion that European states will fight shoulder to shoulder in Korean Peninsula, Taiwan Straits, or South China Sea at the level we expect together with the United States. That's not, I don't think, what we expect the Europes to play in this region. But I think Europe is the highly significant normative power in the domains of the strategic, assessment in the Western Pacific, because what China tried to frame the issue is everything is domestic, everything is a one-by-one issue in terms of South China Sea and Senkaku, Diaoyu Island issue. Everything should be framed as the domestic. But once that Europe comes into play and define it as this is the internationally very important issue, that will become the globally, the global value in terms of the framing of those issues. So that I think Europe's continued, presence in the Western Pacific is a very important stabilizer for the, the strategic situation in Indo-Pacific. Over to you.
So much. And Frederic, I think that leads nicely to you. So you're based in Paris, I'm based in Berlin, we're part of the same team, but there's a bit of a Franco-German thing going on in the Indo-Pacific strategy as well. So where are the main differences between Berlin and Paris when it comes to what the expectation level is also in the region of what we can actually deliver? And maybe you can also give us a word on, or lift the veil on the 22nd of February, the big Indo-Pacific powwow that we are supposed to experience will taking place in Paris. Maybe you can fill us in a little bit of what the French Council Presidency plans are at the moment.
That's a lot of questions, very few words. But let me start with, I would like to answer Ken to start with, because what he says about European presence is both right and exaggerated. I'm more struck by the Japanese insisting on UK's presence when actually UK's presence in actual military term is limited, whereas it's probably more present than any other European state in terms of industrial defense cooperation to start with. So don't underestimate other partners. And if we look at the partners whom you actually worked with recently in the past 12 months in the South China Sea, for example, they did belong to the EU, and in a big way. So yes, you can be dismissive, and yes, the EU is not the US and isn't likely to become the US, but nevertheless, there are things that can be done, and this would be exaggerated to say that nothing is possible there. The second thing the second question is about your the differences between Germany and France. First of all, there is a completely different sensitivity. France has territories and population in the Indo-Pacific, hence the need to defend them, and therefore the approach has to be different. Your perspective depends on where you sit, and clearly there is no criticism in that. This is a reality. I think that the EU strategy is in itself an interesting quid pro quo. We focus in the EU on our common approaches. And then there is the more military side, which is perhaps more French, which is developed elsewhere. But the French do not expect from the EU per se a strong development, a strong cooperation from that perspective. And if you look at the French partnerships in the Indo-Pacific, they are precisely with Indo-Pacific partner, be it India, be it Australia for some time.
We can get back to that as well.
Yes, be it Japan too, and so on and so forth. And all of that within the ambit of the US alliance. That's an important component of it as well. Germany, of course, has a less, I mean, for Germany, the military dimension in that part of the world is much less obvious, and so on. We do meet on a number of things, and they are translated in the strategy. Where we probably not disagree, but have different perception for mainly domestic political reason is, for example, on trade. What I am actually surprised as a French citizen is that Germany is not more aggressive on the trade dimension of the strategy, because this is very much the DNA of the EU. This is where it can become strategic as well. But then we would also have questions to ask our Japanese partners. I'm amazed to see that you're willing to welcome enthusiastically the UK in the CPTPP. And although this is a purely rhetorical question at this stage, what about EU application to the CPTPP in terms of actual firepower economically and potential for trade diversion and therefore rebalancing of the relationship with China? I mean, clearly this is not on the EU agenda, so you can feel free to react the way you want right now, but this is a question that needs to be asked, because I'm quite amazed by the skepticism which is, with which this question is met when asked to Japanese counterparts, when in economic terms at least it could make some sense with strong strategic perspective.
Give us a little bit of a feed on the 22nd
Oh,
of
yes.
February.
Well, basically, what will be the 22nd about? It will be about three objectives. The French will want the European to keep appropriating further the Indo-Pacific concept. I mean, this was not obvious for anybody again 2 years ago. We have gone remarkably fast on that, thanks to cooperation with Germany, thanks to cooperation with the Netherlands, and so on. And the concept has been gradually appropriated by other countries. I mean, the Czech Republic, for example, not an obvious candidate for an Indo-Pacific role, just named a special envoy for the Indo-Pacific. That means there is something else, and we can play on all the sort of quid pro quo that have been created by the various motivation of the European partner. The second objective is to show the Indo-Pacific countries that Europe means business. Europe means business. The global gateway is evidence that that Europe means business, and this is not yet a complete things. Not yet a complete program. A few additions has to be brought to the to this strategy. Nevertheless, it does exist, and this is now the time for our Indo-Pacific partner to jump in and start discussing and start pulling the Europeans in, because what is behind is the Chinese question. And the Chinese question is not something that anybody can ignore, whether we like it or not. And third, you know, the Indo-Pacific is a vast thing, so we'll have to start somewhere. So what the French presidency is doing now is discussing with the European colleagues of concrete projects that will not materialize the entire strategy, but which will be a beginning that will say to the rest of the world, we mean business, you can work with us, and this is where we start. And of course, there will be a lot of voices say, well, this is not enough, and clearly this will probably not be enough, most likely, but nevertheless, we have to start somewhere. That's what the 22nd February meeting will be about.
That leads me a little bit to Frank Rosentritt, who I know has a past in banking as well. So let me ask you a money question. Oh. Where does the money come from for the Global Gateway? Are we ready and are we willing in Europe to actually spend money in the Indo-Pacific that is not a reappropriation of certain funds that have been going in certain places anyway, but do we mean business? Do we mean business in Germany saying, we're actually willing to invest significantly in this region, not just from a trade perspective, but also kind of really put financing on the table, put credit guarantees on the table? What is it that we can do and will be doing? Because as Frederick has pointed out, the frigate that we've sent from Germany was a nice thing, but also, as Jimbo has been saying, there's not a great expectation of our military role. So it is probably the money that is expected, the trade role that is expected, the normative role that is expected. What can we expect from Germany at the moment on the financial side here?
At first, we have to speak about that it's not only Germany who should do this, because why is China so successful to form his own narrative? Because China divide Europe, so try to divide Europe, and the global gateway. It's I would with about more money. It's only 300 billion, I think, and if you see the BRA from China is something like 1,000 billion, so it's one third of the BRA. So it is a lot of money, but I think it's not much enough. But we should do together with all European partners. It should not be initiative with 3, 4, 5 or 5 European countries. This having said, of course, it's guarantees. Supporting companies, because if I travel a lot in this region, and the most asked question to me in Kuala Lumpur, in Jakarta, in Tokyo, and also in Taiwan, and India, of course, also is, where's Germany? Where's Europe? We do not want this stuff from China. We want. But where is the alternative from Europe? Where is the democratic alternative? And China brings everything. He brings the product and also the financing to the product, very cheap. And so for the business makers there, and also for the government, it's very easy to say yes, because it's cheap, and you can find it the hotelery full service. So yes, it's a full service package. So and after 3 or 5 years, they wake up and say, "Oh, it was not a full service package, only a full service for China and not for me, because now I'm not owned this because the harbor now goes over to China because I'm bankrupt because the high yield, for example." So and now we should give alternatives, clever alternatives, and because China. The export of China is not only technology and research. They export also their autocratic norms, so the dictatorship norms, and we should export our norms, our values, and the people there love our values. But right now, it makes a difference between Germany behavior, whether you are democratic or not. If you see to Malaysia, for among example, the last member of a government in Malaysia, and Malaysia becoming a very democratic country in this region, was Michael Kloos. It's many years ago. Michael Kloos was the government, and that's not my understanding. I repeat myself. We have to start a diplomatic firework in our democratic partners in Asia, Southeast Asia, and also Japan. And of course, yes, we have to finance this. We have to finance the project. We have to think about railways. We have to think about our norms. Because if you set the norms there, you have the business after that. And if the China set the norms, then they have the whole market. And so we need the money, yes. And I think we have to spend also money from our own budget from every country, because we have to know that spending money in this region is. It's a surviving strategy for our children, for our grandchildren. If we do not spend money right now in this region, sometimes it could be that dictatorship for the Communist Party of China sitting in Beijing and take the role and say, okay, oh, your machinery factory is too fast, I draw down. So, your light is too light, I draw down. And I do not want to live in this world, and so we have now to spend money. Maybe it's a little bit expensive right now, but the costs are nothing. Again, the costs, if you do, it's not. Like climate change.
I have a politician of the FDP sitting here telling us to spend money, which is a rare thing in Germany. Normally the Liberal Party is more about keeping the budget tight, but you regard it as an investment strategy, right?
Of course, but budget is always, budgeting is a thing of priority. So of course we have to reduce some things, of course, but to invest in our values, there have to be no limits.
I know you wanted to comment on that before I turn back to Didier as well.
And it's not because I disagree with any of what was said, but there is a dimension which goes too often unnoticed or not noticed enough at least, that this, for the first time, the global gateway gives explicitly a political dimension to what Europe does in the world. It says clearly that this is there to balance the Chinese BRI. And we tend to forget a little too much that in Africa, for example, which is going to be the main focus of the global gateway, I mean, Europe has given more in grants to Africa than the BRI to Africa through loans. So in terms of real cost, that should be underlined. Where Europe has been definitely very weak, and that matters in terms of value that you were insisting upon so much, is on getting the political credit and the political benefits of its actual investment. And just by the fact that we have this global gateway, that doesn't solve the problem entirely, but from that perspective, this is definitely a step in the right direction.
Definitely.
Didi, you also wanted to comment, I could see that.
No, I was agreeing actually. China, the Communist Party of China tells a really good story. They have enormous propaganda experience, external propaganda, internal propaganda. They devote enormous financial resources, manpower resources. They have the discipline of the Communist Party behind telling that story. That's what Xi Jinping wants all Chinese to do, is tell the China story well, and they do it around the world. You know, and we have recently, in recent years and decades, we have a relatively poor achievement in this area, and I would call it something like strategic messaging. Coming from European governments, we need a lot more strategic messaging, powerful messaging, good messaging, honest messaging. Also about aid, about development. The United States is the same. The US actually gives very large amounts of aid, and did all the way through the beginning of the pandemic to countries around the world, but didn't shout about it on the rooftops. Yeah, it just does it as part of the system, because the world, you know, with America as a dominant global power right now, still, it's just built into the way that America is that it does these things, that these things happen, and it doesn't kind of talk about them very much. And I think we really have neglected to tell our own story well, if you like, and that, so strategic messaging is a powerful tool if it's used, but also leadership in European countries, if I may say so, that is prepared to pick that up and to actually provide good leadership, bold leadership, honest leadership, but strategic leadership and expressive leadership, to really sort of describe what the problems are and to say, this is what we need to do, this is what, this is what's happening, and just let's do it, right? Rather than just let everything kind of, go its own way as before, forever, fritter away, etc. Do you think? Yes, sure, of course.
Because how you see how successful China framed this case.
Yeah.
Xi Jinping has this two times 100 year strategy. He said, okay, 100 in the anniversary of 100 of founding the Communist Party, we want to be there. And 2049, the 100th birthday of China founding, we want to be the leader of the world. And so and everybody believes that, and in the population recommendation, everybody, not everybody, of course, they follow them. And you ask the correct question is, where is our strategy? I think we live week by week, month by month,
Right.
and now and so where is the big strategy for our values? Right. And I think now it's time to come together with Japan, with the European Union, with the US, and with all democratic countries we have. This is the Ukraine crisis and what happens in Hong Kong. And of course, Uiguren in Xinjiang, of course. But this is the wake-up call for our democracy. And now it's time for every politician of a liberal world to stay inside of freedom.
So, Didier, as an observer of Berlin politics as well, for the first few weeks in office, what's the report card you're giving the German Chancellor on terms of leadership then there? And maybe, Frederic, after that, on what can we expect from Paris in terms of leadership?
Well, I know that Chancellor Scholz is in DC right now, so that's good. But overall, I have to ask myself, what has he been doing precisely? I honestly haven't seen so much happening in public that I thought was somehow seizing the initiative early on, showing that leadership. I think, good leadership matters, yeah? And you can't just administer a country. You can't just take a technocratic approach and hope that rules will solve every problem. Well, they won't, because people are made up of more than that. So I see one very interesting possibility, which is I think that the new economics minister, Robert Habeck, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, you will know more about the insides of this than I do, it seems to be open to ideas when it comes to managing or dealing with China. He does not have a strong track record with China, that's for sure. It's not his thing. Maybe there's a possibility there for really strong input to shape his new role, which is a large new role in this government.
Because also a lot of the industrial policy questions will be dealt with in the ministry, or the question of the green transition, all of these questions will be handled
all
there
kinds
as well.
of issues, export control, technical issues, standards issues. These are all related to the economic ministry. They're absolutely core.
Yes, we have a little bit internal coalition in this question, because I cannot speak about the coalition agreement or the negotiation process, but I can say.
But we would love that.
Yes,
oh,
okay.
Yeah, but please do.
But if we come to this topic, because you mentioned Robert Habeck, it's the Green Party and the Liberal Party have in topics of human rights, liberal society, use the same words. We are very strong together, and so. And the SPD is a much more try to understand the other side, try to understand why Putin is dealing so, why Xi Jinping, and so. And you see the social democratic behavior if it comes to Russia. You see if it comes to China. So you see how Heiko Maas deal in the last 4 years. You said you didn't see Olaf Scholz in last week's. I didn't see also not, but where was Heiko Maas? 4 years. So, and I think now we can to change things, and the Green Party and the Liberal Party is in this topics very close together.
Closely aligned. So, what's the view from Paris, Frederic, in terms of leadership? You have a presidential election coming up, and of course, right now, the topic can be boosted up. The Indo-Pacific region, the new strategic positioning vis-à-vis China or in the global order. But how long will that be? How long will foreign policy be actually an item on the agenda? When will France switch into domestic mode?
Look, I'm not sure right now that Indo-Pacific is the absolute priority simply because of the Ukraine crisis. Yeah. If you speak of President Macron these days, you speak of him as talking to Putin, about to visit Kiev, and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, there will be and there will remain an interest in the Indo-Pacific for the very same reason that we were involved at the very beginning. We cannot escape it. You can say everything you want about French presence in the region. This is a reality. And because of this reality, there is no way you can get out of it. So we remain involved in the Indo-Pacific. We'll keep pushing There is a growing realization in France that things need to be done collectively, not that we ignore it. I mean, one of the very strong point of the French diplomacy is its capacity to mobilize, to use the multilateral system and so on. That will continue. Now, like everywhere else, I mean, the world is moving fast from priority to priority. We are always under crisis management mode, and of course it will impact on the ongoing crisis. But, you know, the motivation is there, the rationale is there, and that will continue with ups and downs, but that will continue.
Is that the same in Tokyo as well? Would you say are the three top strategic priorities for the Japanese government at the moment? Where would you situate them at the moment?
I will name top three: China, China, China. But as all mentioned, that obviously that Ukraine crisis are currently hijacking the political motivation in Tokyo, and that will all spill over to our reconsideration with how to deal with Russia, and also the strategy towards how we can really diversify the interest between Russia and China at this moment. So I will concur with that as well. But this year is the epic year for revising our national security strategy, and I think that priority motivation for the Japanese government is how we can really introduce the true sense of strategic competition with China. But at the same time, that the strategy is sometimes very paradoxical. Looking back in 2018-19, seemingly hawkish right-winger Prime Minister Abe was the prime mover to revitalize the relation with China with the renewed, investment plan, and also to seek for more like a commensurate economic interest vis-a-vis China in collaboration with BRI projects as well. And 2020 was the time that the Japanese government sent the official invitation to President Xi Jinping to come to Tokyo as a state guest. That was the moment of the Japan-China relation to become much more flourish under the very conservative administration. Now that Kishida is in power, he's from the Dobi school from the LDP. But at the same time, he is the prime minister who has committed very firmly on the defense buildup than anybody else in the predecessors. And probably that this is the time that we are going to build up much more quota of the defense budget for the next fiscal year. And we have also committed within the US-Japan alliance framework that the role of the self-defense force will become much more robust in the coming years. So those will be the composition of what's going to happen in the coming months. But at the same time, things to be added is that sometimes strategy and the value-driven diplomacy is very hard to be realized in tandem, because currently that since the late 1990s, the democracy has been in decline, same as in the Indo-Pacific, and we have lost the momentum of the parallel development of the economic growth and also the political pluralization, and many of those Indo-Pacific nations, which also translated into the policy preferences that the simple value-driven diplomacy would not really make a difference to those each end of diplomatic engagements in the corners of the Asia Pacific region. For example, in Vietnam, obviously Vietnam is a non-democratic country, but strategically become increasingly important for Japan. So in that sense, that non-invitation towards Vietnam to the democracy summit that we had in December was simply, I don't think it was a right decision to make. And so, which probably provides us to think about how much we can really prepare for the backup plan for those in-between states, gray zones, and also transitional states in between democracy and authoritarian states. Those are pivotally very important states for Japan and EU, but whether we have a tool to engage them. And the tool, probably the tool, who has a tool would maybe China, with the very attractive ecosystem, which laid out by the Frederick. And China has some, the economic tools and systems and digital platforms to make to those countries. In order to compete, we have to be economically competent and also resilient. And also we have to timely financing to those strategic infrastructures and assets whenever it's needed. If it is, if it involves the kind of official sovereign funds initiatives to be needed, we really need to decisively mobilize those funds to strategically invest to those infrastructure. I think what we need is such a kind of strategic realignment, how to deal with those economic competition scheme, especially those in-between cluster of the countries.
I think you raise a very, very important point here, because obviously we can talk from a normative perspective, but the reality is messy, and it's not going to be as pretty as we think. Frederick, maybe to you, quick question on the 22nd of February again. The selection of countries that has been chosen for this has not been chosen along the lines of democracy, non-democracy, but has been very regional. Is that the French interpretation of a realistic approach? Is that this is the reality that we have to deal with? These are the countries in the region. We don't distinguish between the gray zones or the black and white here? Well,
I don't think this is a novelty. If you look at the FTAs, for example, that the EU signed, I mean, you do have an FTA with Vietnam, I mean, which hardly qualifies as a democratic country. So yes, this is a very pragmatic approach to the reality. And in that pragmatic approach, there is also a political message, which is we are ready to move in to do things more actively than we've been doing in the past, and there are benefits for everyone. But the message is also that unless you do not conduct policies which are not going to be harmful to our own interests, and that clearly means some degree of cooperation with China. I mean, this is not against all cooperation with China, but some type of cooperation with China, especially when it comes to maritime security, the sea lane of communication in the Indian Ocean, for example, by which 70% of the European trade transit, then cooperation is not really possible. So that's the approach. The message about China is pretty clear. China is not invited. This is also a European approach. The US will not be present. And within the region, then we can do things that were not possible, for example, within ASEM or other format, which have in the past reunited European and Asian together.
Didi, does that muddy our approach vis-a-vis China? If we are like, okay, it's okay to work with non-democracies if it works against China, is that something where we kind of, we're talking about the normative approach. It was lauded by Jimbo as well. Frank Müller-Rosentritt, a heavy advocate of the approach. But then in the end, how straightforward are we when it comes to values?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that getting one's values and one's interests to align is the core issue here. It's enormously difficult. I'm not sure it's really possible, to be honest with you. It's something to strive for, and it will always be imperfect. And I think, we need to be realistic, we need to be pragmatic, carefully so, I suppose. I also just wanted to add that this coming decade, these 10 years now, seem to me to be a time of considerable risk, because we've got and I'm sorry, this isn't quite on that point, but I think I just addressed it, what I thought about that one. But we've got Xi Jinping, who is 68. He'll be 69 in the summer. We've got Putin, who's 69. He'll be 70 in October. These are men who really, I think, feel that they are at the height of their power, at the cusp of their power. I mean, they're not young. They're also not, you know, very old, if you like. I mean, as long as their health holds out, yeah, they're not that young, obviously. But enormous ambition and enormous drive for their personal power. These are these two sort of leader-led systems, as the Chinese rhetoric says. Russia and China have in common that we are leader-led systems, yeah. And therefore, the risks in this coming decade, I think, are really great for Europe, for Japan. And I would actually hope that, just like Kenji said, China, I would hope that Europe would be saying that too, and would then also, I understand Ukraine, I'm not for a second looking away from Russia and Ukraine, but there are connections here that are terribly important and even more long-term maybe, and that a sense of sort of clever pragmatism would also recognize the allies that we need in that Indo-Pacific region, be whatever they are, whoever they are.
So we're in a process of devising a national security strategy at the moment in Germany. This is a fancy new word for what we would call white paper before, but what is it going to be about? Is it going to be something new? Can you give us a sneak preview of what the thinking behind it was when putting that in the coalition treaty? Because, I mean, you don't for no reason put in there we need a national security strategy. What were the motivations behind that, and maybe also the strategic priorities that you see there?
Yes, not every is for the public, but
you see, I'm trying to poke him.
Yes, I know, I know, but I think so. We changed our narrative when it comes to China. We have to change our narrative if it comes to national security, because we were very naive with China, and we are very naive with our own security. And see how secure are our hospitals, for example? How secure are our public infrastructure, water cleaning, for example? And if you come to Israel or to Taiwan, for example, every public sector has a hack, is secure. And they, for example, in Taipei, they have more than 200,000 attacks per day from China on their public infrastructure. So, and so we have to block them. So and we don't have it right now, but it could be possible, because it's not the tanks come from Moscow to Germany. This is the hacker sitting in Moscow and attacks our public security there, and not only sitting in Russia, they're also sitting in the Communist Party in China, and this is the reason where we have to say we want to sit together and check out what we need in Germany, where we are. Where we have nothing, and our infrastructure is not very secure, and so I think it's more about cyber in this, and we have known of the government in the last decades we have no panel where foreign policy, for example, there's no panel where we have politicians from the foreign commerce, committee for foreign affairs, politics from digital affairs, politics from economic affairs, and we come all together and think, and also from security affairs, and so we come together and think about what's happened, and I think it's absolutely crucial to do this, and we can learn from attacked countries. We can learn from Israel, for example. We have to be very close with Israel, because they were every day under attack. We have to be very close to Taiwan, and then we have to copy the system. We have to only to refound it. We can only have to copy it. That was the reason where we want to have this National Security Council.
National Security Strategy, National Security Council, these are all live debates in Germany still, I would say, as it's ongoing. We have time for one kind of final round here on this panel today. We will have some more in-depth, detailed discussions later today in smaller rounds, offline, not the big live stream, but in like just the expert circles. But for this kind of, for concluding our final version, maybe let's just go back to where we started. Where Didi has kind of started us off in, this is the new world that we find ourselves in. This is the kind of new reality that we face. So what are the things to watch for in this new reality? The 2-3 things that you would say over the coming months, these are the crucial spots to watch for, where every observer of foreign policy, every foreign policy maker has to be really mindful. What are the landmarks that we have to see? I'll hand it to you first, Didi.
Thank you. An easy task. Not. No. So, I mean, from my point of view, we really need to get smarter about what is the Communist Party of China, what does it do, how does it operate in our own societies. I actually think we need some form of Foreign Agent Registration Act in Germany, in the European Union, because we simply need to get these organizations, these associations, these networks, and I realize this isn't quite foreign policy, but it is actually also to do with our relationship with China, obviously, and how China is working amongst us here, which I've studied quite a lot. To get these networks, these associations which are connected to the party, which are connected to the organs of the party. To the United Front is just one of them, but it is an important one. It's not the whole story. And we need to know what is it we're dealing with here, because we really don't. We are really rather, if I may say so, ignorant's a harsh word, but we're unaware of what we have in our midst. And we somehow need to learn about that. And I don't think that, people talk about China competence in Germany, so China competence, so we need more China competence. I have to confess, I really loathe this phrase, because to me, it's just very technocratic. And I think we need to infuse our responses to China with more than just a technocratic approach. It's not as if when you learn Chinese and suddenly you're going to understand everything that's happening. You're not. You need to know about national security. You need to know about the organization of the Communist Party of China. You need to know how all these things work. So, China competence per se is not going to solve our problems. We need a much more kind of politically aware approach, and I think we also need it in schools. I think we need it in education. I think we would do very well to follow more also the Finnish model of educating students to spot disinformation, to deal with these kinds of propaganda pushes.
So a comprehensive approach. Ken Jimbo, what are your landmarks for the next few months upcoming? What are the things we need to watch for that will guide us a little bit in this new emerging world order?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, but I think Japan is in the dynamic process of realigning the diplomatic and security portfolio, not only with United States. United States is always an important actor, upgrading the alliance, increasing those jointness in the military. Those are important agenda all the time. But at the same time, we have been seriously investing our diversification of the strategic portfolio. Australia, India, ASEAN, and also EU member states. Those have become pivotally very important, diplomatic assets than ever before for Japan. So this time we are seriously, engaging those, the partners to create a new kind of portfolio of our defense and also diplomacy. That's number one. Secondly, but we are in the process of realignment. All the big kind of agenda is now focusing upon China, as I mentioned. And we don't really have actually to fight the two wars vis-a-vis Russia at the same time. But Russia can be best cost imposer for Japan to delay our process of such realignment, just to create the China-Russia, collaboration in the Northern Front can easily, makes us to share our self-defense force assets to reallocate in those northern front as well. So we wish to divide the China-Russia interest to make Russia's strategic interest in Asia to be more diversified. And we understand Russia wish to pivot their some of those resources to the Far East. And their pivotal own rebalance strategy towards Asia should not be always, go through China. And because there are so many other strategic assets that Russia wish to invest upon. And I think Japan should be the great destination for Russia as well. And that could be not I don't really have an illusion that those two countries' interests can be easily divided, especially as of now. But at the same time, it is very important, at least to I think complicate the Chinese strategic calculation that every strategic issue they face with Asia cannot be always in line with Russia. And those are, I think, very nuanced approaches that Tokyo needs to explore vis-a-vis Moscow. And I think this is a very difficult moment to explore right now. But I think those nuances should also be understood with each other between Japan and European member states as well. And so that's not a snapshot observation in the next few months, but those are something that I wish to offer.
Thank you so much. And I think that is a good, so Frederick, it made me think immediately about what is the European response to that also from the Paris perspective. Are these our landmarks as well? Do we see these kind of key items on the agenda that need to be addressed as well from our perspective?
We certainly need to address all that. First of all, I do agree with Ken on the fact that we need to look at the China-Russia relationship very carefully. It's asymmetric, not just in terms of assets and power. It's asymmetric also in terms of potential response, because I really don't think that China would come to Russian rescue should it risk an open conflict, which makes, introduce a lot of nuances in between. Now, what I think will be very important to look at in the forthcoming months is all the fallout of the Ukraine crisis, for a series of reasons. Not so much what's happening now, we have all trying to defuse the crisis, but then it will inevitably raise questions that we discussed earlier. Not just the diversion of attention, there will be a question of resource allocation and so on, burden sharing, and we Europeans may very well find ourselves alone at the end of this process. So this is something that we have to consider very carefully. The fact that the possibility exists should give pause to a number of sort of Pavlovian reflex to see, let's align behind the United States, not because we oppose them, we are actually exactly converging in the same direction, but because we cannot necessarily rely on them up to a point because they'll be busy somewhere else. So we have to take responsibility for our own security. It's not going to change overnight, but at least we can move in that direction. And I think that's one of the critical things that we will discuss in the forthcoming months. And from the outcome of this discussion, then a lot of what's happening in the Indo-Pacific and your presence in it will gradually emerge.
So we have to watch out for what the Communist Party is doing. We have to this time be serious about engaging our partners, as Ken Jimbo has been saying it, and be aware of the China-Russia dimension, which was also kind of reiterated by Frederick, that is one of the key items for us on the agenda, and watch what's happening after the Ukraine crisis. So the last 30 seconds to go to Frank Müller-Rosentritt. From your perspective, what are the things you watch out for in the kind of emerging strategic context?
Yes, I think I would wish that sometimes Putin and Xi Jinping are going to be mistaken, that the people say that they see they are wrong. And we have to organize this process, because we have to now, as politic makers, we have to bring the miracle of unity. Because now because they want to divide us, and our answer should be the unification of, and this is the miracle where we can be as democratic alliance together to autocratic systems, and this is the first one. And I think then a lot of things can be possible, and of course we have to be very strong together, and we should stay on side with Ukraine right now. And it works only with democratic partners, not only in the EU. It works only with democratic partners all over the world, and one of the most important partners is Japan.
I think we couldn't conclude it any better. So let me thank our panelists here for a fantastic discussion early in the morning. Thank you to Kenjimbo, particularly to Tokyo. Thank you to all of you, Didi Tatlow, Frank Müller-Rosentritt, Friedrich Graf, for joining us here in this morning for what was certainly not the classic Asia conversation, but certainly telling us that a Japan-Europe forum is now about global politics. The topic of Russia has reinserted itself forcefully on the agenda, I would say, and that we have a new tone coming from Berlin as well that maybe leads to a different kind of Europe in the years to come. So we'll see what happens in the future. Thank you all for joining us on the screens, and I hope to see you all soon in person and in our next conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.